11:32 hours. January 3, 1943. Roughly 22,000 feet over Saint-Nazaire, on the Atlantic coast of occupied France. Staff Sergeant Alan Eugene Magee, 24 years old, is curled inside the ball turret of a Boeing B-17F-27BO Flying Fortress, serial 41 to 24620, nose art name, Snap. Crackle. Pop. He is the ball turret gunner, part of a 10-man crew from the 360th Bomb Squadron, 303rd Bomb Group, 8th Air Force. This is his 7th combat mission. The target below is a torpedo storage area and facilities tied to the massive German U-boat pens at Saint-Nazaire, one of the most heavily defended points on the Atlantic coast. Inside the turret there is no room to stand, stretch, or even sit upright. The sphere hangs under the bomber's belly, barely large enough for one man. Magee lies on his back, knees bent, feet in stirrups, shoulders pressed against the armor plate. In front of his face sit the sights and grips of two Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, each capable of roughly 750 rounds per minute, fed by ammunition belts that snake down from cans inside the fuselage. The glass and thin armor around him are his only protection against fighters and flak. One hard rule comes with the ball turret: no parachute inside. The space is too tight. Magee's parachute, an American chest-type pack weighing several kilograms, waits above him in the fuselage. If the order to bail out ever comes, he must unlock the turret, crank it to the access position, open the hatch, climb into the aircraft, grab the parachute, clip it to his harness, and then find an exit. On a calm day during training that is awkward. In combat, in a diving, burning bomber, it borders on impossible. Into Flak City. The mission has launched from England earlier that morning. Around 85 heavy bombers have crossed the channel, mostly B-17s, some B-24s, protected by a modest fighter escort that cannot stay with them deep into France. Their objective is not to crack the submarine pens themselves. Those concrete monsters have roofs several meters thick, but to destroy the torpedo stores and support facilities that keep the U-boats operating. The raid is part of the wider air offensive meant to reduce the pressure on Allied shipping in the Atlantic. By late morning, as the formation approaches Saint-Nazaire, German radar has already done its work. Anti-aircraft batteries are ready. Fighters from nearby Luftwaffe fields are climbing. At this altitude, the outside temperature is well below freezing. Oxygen masks are mandatory. The bombers hold tight formation, overlapping fields of fire, turning the sky into a moving fortress of machine gun barrels and aluminum skin. At 11:33, Magee tracks shapes in the distance through his sight. Messerschmitts or Focke-Wulfs might come in at any moment, but right now the main threat is invisible until it explodes. Flak. German 88mm and 105mm guns fire time-fused shells that burst at a preset altitude, throwing a sphere of steel fragments in every direction. The crews call Saint-Nazaire Flak City for a reason. The first black puffs appear at their level, then more, until the formation is flying through a field of explosions. First hit. At 11:34, a flak burst detonates close under Snap. Crackle. Pop. The blast slams into the underside of the B-17. Shrapnel punches through the thin aluminum and plexiglass of the ball turret. One jagged piece rips into Magee's turret, smashing glass, tearing metal, and wounding him. Another severs or jams part of the turret drive. The guns, just moments ago tracking for targets, freeze. The cramped space fills with the smell of burned metal and cordite. Magee feels hot pain, then cold air. His oxygen line is gone. At 22,000 feet, with no oxygen supply, a man has only seconds before hypoxia dulls his thinking and robs him of strength. Magee knows he must get out of the turret. He wrestles with the controls, unlocks the mechanism, and hand cranks the turret toward the access position. Each movement is slower than the last. His vision darkens at the edges. He forces the hatch open and drags himself up into the fuselage, emerging into the narrow catwalk between the bomb racks. A ruined parachute. In the dim bomb bay, the noise of engines and flak is a constant roar. The slipstream pulls at open gaps in the skin where shrapnel has torn through. Temperatures inside are still well below freezing. Magee staggers along the catwalk, fighting to stay conscious, groping for his parachute pack in the spot where he left it. He finds it, canvas, straps, and folded silk. But something is wrong. The pack is shredded. Flak fragments from that first hit have torn straight through it. The carefully folded silk, meant to bloom into a life-saving canopy, hangs in ragged strips. Several panels are simply gone. The harness webbing is ripped. There is no chance this parachute will open cleanly, if at all. He is in a bomber that is still under fire, at over 4 miles altitude, and he has no usable parachute. The second hit. While Magee stares at the ruined pack, the mission moves into its most dangerous phase. The bomb run is beginning. Bomb bay doors grind open. Aircraft must hold a steady, predictable course to ensure accuracy, making them easier targets. Saint-Nazaire's flak gunners know this and concentrate their fire. At around 11:36, another flak shell finds snap, crackle, pop. This burst is closer, higher, and deadlier. Fragments rip into the right wing. A large section near an engine, with fuel and structural members, is torn away. The B-17's wing, designed to carry heavy loads at high speed, cannot survive the sudden loss of lift and structure. The aircraft rolls violently. In an instant, the bomber goes from controlled flight to a deadly spiral. Inside, the world flips. Gravity becomes a sideways force. Loose equipment and empty shell casings whip through the interior. Smoke and maybe flames spread from fuel lines and burning fabric. Somewhere in the chaos, the order to bail out is shouted, or simply understood. Magee tries to move from the bomb bay toward the radio room, perhaps still clinging to some hope of finding another parachute or reaching an exit. But he is already weakened from blood loss and lack of oxygen. As the aircraft tumbles, he is thrown hard against the fuselage. Ejected into the sky. In high-altitude emergencies, sudden structural failure can turn the bomber itself into a kind of explosive shell. Panels tear away. The skin peels back. The pressure differential between the thin air outside and the interior creates powerful suction. Men, equipment, and debris are pulled toward any opening. As snap, crackle, pop continues its uncontrolled spin, the fuselage breaks further. Magee is near a damaged section when another twist of the airframe and the rushing slipstream combine. He is sucked out of the aircraft through a jagged opening. He is no longer a crewman inside a flying fortress. He is a wounded man falling freely from approximately 20,000 to 22,000 feet over enemy territory, with no functioning parachute and almost no oxygen in his lungs. He blacks out. From here, the physics are brutal and simple. His body tumbles, then stabilizes into a falling posture. In thin air, a human reaches terminal velocity, around 190 to 200 kilometers per hour, roughly 120 miles per hour, after about 10 to 15 seconds. The fall from this height lasts well over a minute. He is unconscious for nearly all of it. He cannot brace, cannot choose where to land, cannot attempt any last-second action. Below him lies the town of Saint-Nazaire. Rail yards, the port, civilian houses, and, crucially, a large glass-roofed railway station. Impact. The people on the ground see pieces of aircraft raining down. Some see parachutes, other crew members manage to jump properly. Others see something else, a human figure falling without a canopy, a dark shape against the winter sky. At approximately 11:38, Alan Magee's body slams into the glass roof of the Saint-Nazaire railway station. The impact is catastrophic. The roof shatters, turning panes into countless fragments that absorb and distribute some of the energy of the fall. He crashes through, continuing downward, then hits the station interior, steel, stone, and floor. By any reasonable calculation, he should be dead. Instead, when German personnel and local rescuers reach him, they find him alive, but barely. He has severe injuries, multiple broken bones, deep cuts from glass and shrapnel, internal damage to lungs and organs, and a nearly destroyed arm. Later counts will record more than 24 shrapnel wounds in addition to trauma from the fall. Yet he is breathing. The men who pull him from the debris are not American medics. They are enemy soldiers and German medical staff in occupied France. They put him on a stretcher. They carry him out of the ruined station and toward an ambulance, bound for a Kriegsmarine hospital. For now, he is not a target. He is a patient. The ball turret gunner of Snap, Crackle, Pop has just survived one of the most improbable events of the Second World War, a fall from over 4 miles up without a working parachute. 11:43 hours. January 3rd, 1943. Saint-Nazaire railway station, occupied France. Alan Magee lies amid broken glass, twisted metal, and splinters of roof framing. The air inside the station is full of dust and the faint echo of the impact that almost killed him. For a few seconds, no one moves. Witnesses are still processing what they saw: a man falling out of the sky without a parachute and smashing through the glass canopy. Then the shouting starts. First response. By 11:45, German personnel from nearby facilities are on the scene. Saint-Nazaire is a major naval base, home to U-boat pens and torpedo depots. Sailors, soldiers, and railway employees all converge on the wrecked section of roof. Some are armed, expecting saboteurs or another attack. Others carry basic medical satchels. They find Magee unconscious, uniform torn to shreds, his body lacerated by glass and shrapnel. His face is swollen and bloody. One arm bends at an unnatural angle. His ribs are smashed. There are signs of internal bleeding. Yet his chest still moves, shallow but steady. A German medical orderly kneels beside him. He checks the pulse at Magee's neck. There is one. Weak, irregular, but present. They lift him carefully, using improvised supports under his neck and back. Every movement draws a groan from the wounded American, drifting in and out of awareness. Someone notes the U.S. insignia on his uniform. Another points out the remnants of his parachute harness, webbing present, but the pack torn to ribbons. The conclusion is immediate and unbelievable. This man has fallen from a great height without a working parachute and survived. To the hospital. Around 12:05, Magee is loaded into a German ambulance. The vehicle is a military-grade truck-based model, with stretcher racks bolted to the interior and a small cabinet for medical supplies. A Red Cross emblem is painted on the side. The station fades behind them as the ambulance bounces over rough cobblestones toward a nearby Kriegsmarine hospital, a naval medical facility that treats both German personnel and, by necessity, enemy prisoners. On the way, a German doctor quickly assesses his condition. Breathing is labored. Pulse is unstable. The man is in shock, skin cold, clammy, unresponsive. The doctor orders an injection to combat shock and pain, then instructs the driver to go faster. At approximately 12:20, they reach the hospital. Emergency treatment. Inside the hospital, the scene is orderly, almost routine, at least compared to the chaos outside. German doctors and nurses have already treated wounded from air raids, industrial accidents, and frontline evacuations. They add one more to their list: an American airman with inexplicable survival. Magee is transferred to an operating table in a white-tiled room lit by overhead lamps. Instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps are laid out on a tray. Anesthesia is prepared. German medical records will later list his injuries: multiple broken bones, including leg and arm fractures, severe facial trauma, numerous lacerations, internal injuries, and damage to one lung. Several of his teeth are gone. He has lost a significant amount of blood. Around 12:40, surgeons begin the first of several operations. They set fractures with splints and plaster casts. They suture deep cuts. They remove embedded glass and shrapnel where they can reach it safely. They insert chest drains to relieve pressure around his damaged lung. For several hours, his life hangs on the edge. In another time and place, without surgical tools and trained staff, the fall alone would have been fatal. Combined with his earlier flak wounds, his chances should be close to zero. Instead, he is in a functioning hospital, under the care of well-trained doctors, even if they wear the uniform of the enemy. By early evening, around 1800 hours, the surgeons finish. Magee is still alive. Prisoner of war. Over the next days in January, Magee drifts between consciousness and deep sedation. When he is awake enough to register his surroundings, he hears German being spoken, sees unfamiliar uniforms, and feels the stiff weight of casts and bandages. Every breath hurts. Somewhere around January 10, 1943, his condition stabilizes. The immediate danger of infection and uncontrolled bleeding eases. A German officer visits his bedside, accompanied by an interpreter. They confirm his identity: Staff Sergeant Alan Eugene Magee, United States Army Air Forces, 303rd Bomb Group. Under the Geneva Conventions, wounded airmen are prisoners of war, not criminals. The interrogation is limited: name, rank, serial number. The Germans are curious about the mission, the bomber group, and the state of American heavy bomber tactics. But by this point Magee is still too weak for extended questioning. They get what they can, which is very little. At around the same time, the German doctors tell him what happened. They explain that his aircraft was shot down. That witnesses saw him fall without a functioning parachute. That he hit the glass roof of the Saint-Nazaire station and crashed through it. One doctor reportedly remarks that the shattering glass helped absorb the impact, spreading out the forces that would otherwise have killed him instantly. The pieces of the roof acted like a crude, destructive cushion. Magee listens, stunned. He has no memory of the fall itself. Healing under guard. By February 1943, he is moved from intensive surgical care to a recovery ward. The ward is a long room with iron beds, narrow lockers, and windows facing out onto the gray winter light. German naval personnel occupy some beds. Others hold enemy airmen, British, American, sometimes French. Magee's daily life narrows to basics. Nurses change dressings. Doctors check lung function and monitor his stitches and bones. He learns to sit up without passing out. He learns to eat soft food again, his jaw and teeth still tender. Armed guards are present, but they are not hostile. The war is raging elsewhere. Here, in this ward, lives are patched back together piece by piece. Magee understands that if he tries to escape in his state, he will die long before he reaches any friendly line. Survival now means patience. By March, he is fit enough to be moved out of the naval hospital. The next phase is standard for captured Allied aircrew, transfer to a Stalag Luft, a Luftwaffe-run prisoner-of-war camp for airmen, often located in Germany or occupied Poland. These camps have their own routines: roll calls, barracks life, parcels from the Red Cross, and the slow grind of time. For Magee, that will mean over 2 years as a prisoner. The war continues without him. While he recovers and then endures captivity, the air war over Europe intensifies. Daylight raids continue. Losses mount. The 8th Air Force learns, painfully, that heavy bombers alone cannot survive deep penetration missions without long-range fighter escort. Operations like the one over Saint-Nazaire on January 3, 1943 help scratch this lesson into doctrine in blood and aluminum. At the same time, aircraft technology improves. Newer B-17 models and B-24 variants receive incremental armor changes, self-sealing tanks, and refinements in formation tactics. Ball turret positions remain some of the most dangerous spots on the aircraft. Cramped, exposed, dependent on the rest of the bomber staying intact long enough for the gunner to escape. Stories like Magee's circulate quietly among air crews and intelligence officers. A gunner blown out of a B-17 without a parachute and somehow surviving? It sounds like rumor. But for those who handle prisoner-of-war records, the files are clear. He exists. He is alive. His survival adds one more odd data point to wartime medicine and the unpredictable physics of falling bodies and impact surfaces. A new perspective. In the camp, sometime in 1944, Magee can walk without assistance, though he carries lasting damage. Scars mark his face and limbs. His arm has limited range of motion. Breathing deep still brings a faint ache. Yet he is alive when many of his crew are not. From fellow prisoners and captured German newspapers, he learns more details about the mission and its cost. Several of his crewmates from Snap, Crackle, Pop did not survive. Others are prisoners like him. Each had a different experience of those final minutes over Saint-Nazaire: burning aluminum, spinning sky, the roar of air, and the terror of not finding a parachute in time. For Magee, there is something else, an uneasy realization that his survival depended on a chain of conditions he could not control: angle of fall, structural strength of the station roof, medical care in an enemy hospital. It was not skill. It was not training. It was a mix of physics, material properties, and the decisions of people who should have been his captors but became his rescuers. That knowledge settles into him over months and years. It will shape how he sees risk, war, and his own life long after the guns fall silent. 6:10 hours. April 29th, 1945. Somewhere in Central Europe, in a Luftwaffe POW camp. Morning roll call, appel, drags on in the chill air. Prisoners stand in uneven ranks in front of low barracks, thin coats pulled tight, boots scuffing packed dirt. Guards move down the line, counting. The smell of wood smoke and overcrowded huts hangs over the compound. Staff Sergeant Alan Magee, now 26, stands near the end of one row. His face is leaner, older. The scars from Saint-Nazaire are still visible, a faint line across the scalp, irregular marks on his arms and hands. An old fracture in his arm aches in the cold. When he takes a deep breath, his chest twinges where broken ribs and a damaged lung never fully healed. This is Stalag Luft, a camp for Allied airmen. The precise number changes as men are moved, evacuated, or liberated, but thousands of prisoners have passed through camps like this since 1942. Magee has been one of them for more than 2 years. Today, something is different. The front catches up. By early 1945, the war has turned decisively against Germany. The 8th Air Force sends hundreds of bombers at a time, escorted by long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang. Soviet armies are pushing from the east. American, British, and Canadian forces are breaking into the Reich from the west. In the camp, rumors run faster than official announcements. Prisoners pass news from smuggled radios, scraps of newspapers, and overheard guard conversations. Names like Remagen, Rhine Crossing, and Berlin Front are whispered in crowded barracks. In March and April, the sound of distant artillery becomes more frequent. At night, the glow on the horizon is not just the reflected flame of industrial cities, it is the front line moving closer. For Magee, each new report means one thing: survival has a horizon now. The war that nearly killed him is finally burning itself out. The last days of captivity. In the final weeks, camp discipline frays. At 7:30 some mornings, fewer guards appear for roll call. Rations, never generous, become erratic. Supply lines to the camp are failing. Guards are more nervous, glancing toward the perimeter and the road beyond. One afternoon in late April, around 1400 hours, a low rumble passes over the camp. Prisoners look up. A formation of aircraft is passing, but they are not German. The silhouettes show twin tails, familiar to Allied airmen, P-38s or perhaps American twin-engine bombers. No bombs fall, no guns fire. The aircraft simply continue on, deeper into Germany. Magee watches them until they vanish. He doesn't cheer. He just nods once. The air war that began for him in 1942 is still going, only now, his side dominates the sky. Then, on a morning like this one, roll call stops halfway. Around 8:15, officers are called away to the camp gate. Guards cluster on the perimeter. Prisoners feel the tension change, the way a room changes when someone enters with bad news or very good news. At 9:02, the rumor hits the barracks: Allied armor is approaching. Liberation. By midday, the sound of engines and tracks is unmistakable. The first tanks appear on the road outside, dusty, olive-drab machines with white stars on their hulls. Some are American. Others might be British. Behind them roll trucks, jeeps, and half-tracks. The camp gate, for years a hard boundary, becomes a point of negotiation. Local German authority collapses. Some guards quietly disappear, uniforms stripped of insignia, trying to melt into the civilian population. Others stay, hands raised, hoping to surrender without incident. At 12:30, Allied troops enter the camp. Prisoners crowd the fences and then, when allowed, surge forward. Some cry. Some stand in stunned silence. Others attempt shaky salutes. The liberating soldiers, many of them younger than the airmen they are freeing, pass out cigarettes, chocolate, and field rations. Magee moves with the crowd at a slower pace, his injuries making quick movement painful. An American sergeant from the liberating unit notices the limp, the scars, the faded 8th Air Force patch on his worn jacket. "You boys from the forts?" the sergeant asks. "Yeah," Magee answers, voice rough. "Used to be." Medical teams set up triage in one corner of the camp. Men in worse condition than Magee are evacuated first, those with untreated wounds, severe disease, or starvation. Everyone gets a basic exam, weight, temperature, notes on injuries and previous treatment. When the doctor reaches Magee and sees the old surgical scars and poorly set fractures, he shakes his head. "What happened to you, Sergeant?" Magee pauses. "Plane got shot out from under me," he says. "Parachute didn't make it." He hesitates, then adds, almost as if he's still testing the words on his own tongue. "I fell a long way." The doctor doesn't quite understand yet. There will be time for detailed stories later. Repatriation. Over the next weeks, Magee becomes part of a massive logistical operation, the repatriation of POWs. Trucks carry liberated prisoners to airfields. From there, transport aircraft, C-47s, C-54s, sometimes even spare bombers, ferry them to staging areas in France or England. On one gray morning in May 1945, Magee boards a transport plane. The interior is bare metal, canvas seats, ribs of the fuselage visible, but it is the most welcome aircraft he has ever entered. As the engines spool up and the plane begins its takeoff roll, he grips the webbing beside him. The motion, the noise, the smell of fuel and oil, all of it pulls him back toward that day over Saint-Nazaire for a moment. He forces himself to breathe slowly. The plane climbs. There is no flak this time. No enemy fighters. Just cloud and sky. By late May, he is back in the United States. At a processing center, one of several Repel Dep-less, set up for returning servicemen, Magee goes through another round of paperwork, medical exams, and debriefings. Intelligence officers want to know what he saw in the camps, how the Germans handled POWs, whether he noticed new aircraft, weapons, or tactics during his captivity. Then someone brings up his fall. In a small office at 10:15 one morning, an Army Air Forces captain reads from a document. It is a compiled report, statements from German doctors, camp records, and other surviving crew members of Snap. Crackle. Pop. "Sergeant," the captain says, "they say you went out of that aircraft without a functioning chute. Is that accurate?" Magee nods slowly. "I remember the hit. I remember getting up into the bay. I remember the pack being torn up. After that, it's just blank." The captain leans back, studying him. "You understand that what happened to you is statistically impossible?" Magee offers a thin smile. "If it's all the same to you, sir, I'd like to stay on the statistical miracle side of that line." Home front. By summer 1945, Magee returns to civilian life. The details, exact dates, train stations, the first step back onto the streets of his hometown, blur together. What he remembers clearly are small things. The weight of a real mattress under his back instead of a camp bunk. The smell of home cooking instead of thin soup and ersatz coffee. The absence of searchlights, sirens, and the distant thud of artillery. He carries visible reminders of the war. A limp when he's tired. Occasional difficulty drawing a deep breath. The letters "use off" on forms that will follow him through veteran services and medical appointments. He also carries something invisible, the knowledge that he should, by most rational measures, be dead. Work helps. Like many returning airmen, Magee finds employment tied to the skills and temperament the service has drilled into him. Discipline, attention to detail, comfort with machines and procedures. He spends years in civilian aviation-related jobs and other steady work, building a life in a country that is moving rapidly into peacetime prosperity. At some point in the late 1940s, he marries. Family photos will later show him in a suit instead of a flight jacket, standing beside a woman who never saw him in uniform but knows his story. Children and, later, grandchildren grow up hearing a version of that story that emphasizes not the gore but the luck. Not everyone wants to talk about the war. Magee doesn't force it. When he does speak, he keeps his descriptions plain: the turret, the flak, the ruined parachute, and waking up under a German hospital lamp. The story spreads. In the 1950s and 1960s, aviation magazines and veterans' newsletters begin to collect unusual survival stories from the war. Men riding falling aircraft to the ground, pilots ditching damaged fighters and swimming away, aircrew riding out mid-air collisions. Magee's case, wounded, blown out of a disintegrating B-17 at high altitude, no working parachute, surviving a fall through a glass roof, appears in these accounts. Sometimes details are muddled. Altitudes change. Dates drift. The name of the town is occasionally misspelled. But the core is consistent. He is invited to reunions of the 303rd Bomb Group. At those events, held in hotel ballrooms and veterans' halls, men who once flew together in tight combat boxes over Europe meet again, now grayer, thicker around the middle, slower in their movements. At one reunion around 1970, a former navigator raises a glass and says, "Magee, you're the only man I know who needed a train station to break his fall." Laughter follows, but it is the quiet, knowing laughter of men who understand exactly how narrow the margins were up there. Magee smiles, shakes his head, and deflects the attention. For him, the fall is not a party trick. It is a dividing line between two lives, the one that should have ended at 11:38 on January 3, 1943, and the one that somehow kept going. 10:07 hours. November 15, 1979. An office in a regional airline operations building, United States. Alan Eugene Magee, now 60 years old, signs a final stack of papers. Outside the window, civilian airliners taxi past, sleek jets with pressurized cabins and radar noses, a world away from the bare aluminum B-17s of his youth. He has spent decades working in and around aviation. Maintenance coordination, operations, ground support, technical roles where procedures and checklists matter. He has also earned his civilian pilot's license, logging hours in small aircraft where the only gunfire is on distant practice ranges, if at all. For him, aviation has gone from a battlefield necessity to a profession, almost a quiet act of defiance. He went back to the sky that tried to kill him and made it part of his everyday life. Today, he retires from the airline industry. Colleagues shake his hand, offer a cake, a small plaque, a short speech. Most know he served in the war. Fewer know he once fell over 4 miles without a working parachute and lived. From rumor to record. By the early 1980s, his story shifts from campfire rumor and reunion anecdote into something more formal. In 1981, a major American museum magazine features him as one of the most amazing survival stories of the Second World War. The article lays out the facts as best as they can be reconstructed: the B-17F snap, crackle, pop, the mission on January 3, 1943, the flak hits, the destroyed parachute, the 22,000-foot fall, the glass roof of the Saint-Nazaire station, the German surgeons who saved him, the years as a POW. For aviation historians and safety experts, cases like Magee's draw curiosity not because they are reproducible. They are not, but because they highlight how impact surfaces, fall orientation, and intermediate structures can change survivability. The glass roof that might have sliced him apart instead shattered in a way that dissipated some of the energy of his fall. The steel beams and flooring he hit afterward did enormous damage but did not kill him instantly. The presence of a well-equipped enemy hospital, staffed by competent surgeons, turned a fatal accident into a survivable, if brutal, injury sequence. In training environments, instructors sometimes mention the man who fell 4 miles without a chute. They don't present his story as a procedure, there is no technique to copy, but as a reminder that survival in war is not a simple equation. It is influenced by tactics, equipment, training, chance, and the actions of enemy personnel who are still professionals under the laws of war. A changed doctrine. While Magee builds a quiet post-war life, the doctrine that once sent unescorted heavy bombers into Flak City evolves radically. By 1944, the U.S. 8th Air Force has paired its B-17s and B-24s with long-range fighter escort, P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts with drop tanks, P-38 Lightnings, dramatically cutting losses over deep targets in Germany and occupied Europe. Post-war studies confirm what crews already felt. Early raids like Saint-Nazaire were brutal, underprotected, and based on overconfidence in armor and defensive guns. Bailout procedures receive more attention. Training emphasizes keeping parachutes close and properly inspected at all times. Practicing rapid egress routes from cramped positions like ball turrets and tail guns. Understanding that altitude, aircraft attitude, and structural damage can all affect whether a planned bailout is even possible. In some units, the story of the turret gunner who didn't have that chance becomes a cautionary example. Never assume you'll have time to do things by the book. Yet for all the changes in doctrine, equipment, and tactics, Magee's survival remains outside the manual. Bomber design will eventually move away from such exposed positions. Jet aerobombers and later strike aircraft rely more on speed, electronic warfare, and standoff weapons than on gunners in glass bubbles. Ejection seats will become standard in high-performance aircraft, designed to save pilots in situations where a World War II crewman would have had no chance at all. Magee's fall sits at the edge of that evolution, a reminder of the days before ejection seats, when leaving a stricken aircraft meant crawling through aluminum and smoke, hoping the parachute on your chest would open. A return to Saint-Nazaire. September 23, 1995. Saint-Nazaire and the nearby forest of La Balasque-Black, France. Magee, now in his mid-70s, steps carefully onto French soil with his wife, Helen, beside him. He has been invited back to take part in a ceremony organized by local citizens and veterans groups. The event is centered not on his survival, but on something heavier, the 7 crewmates from Snap, Crackle, Pop, who died when the bomber crashed in the forest on that same day in 1943. A memorial has been prepared, a stone marker with inscriptions honoring the crew, set near the crash site. French organizers, some of whom were children or not yet born when the raid happened, have spent years gathering details, locating relatives, and arranging the dedication. At 11 o'clock, under a gray Atlantic sky, the ceremony begins. Local officials speak. Representatives of French veterans groups lay wreaths. An American flag and a French flag stand side by side. Some in the crowd are descendants of those who saw parts of the B-17 fall from the sky. Others are simply residents of a town that lived under occupation and remembers the noise of bombers and flak. When Magee is invited to speak briefly, he keeps his words simple. He mentions his crew by name. He acknowledges the civilians who lived beneath the bombing routes. He thanks the German doctors who saved him and the French citizens who now tend the memory of men who once came here in war. 2 years earlier, on January 3, 1993, another memorial had been dedicated in Saint-Nazaire itself, a 6-foot monument honoring Magee and the crew of Snap, Crackle, Pop. That date, the 50th anniversary of the mission, had marked a turning point where local memory and aircrew history intersected formally. Now, in 1995, standing in the forest near where the bomber came down, Magee is not the man who fell without a parachute. He is simply one survivor paying respect to those who did not. The last years. After retiring in 1979, Magee settles in northern New Mexico, drawn by its open spaces and calmer pace. There, he lives a largely quiet life. Family, community, occasional veterans events, and the normal routines of aging. He keeps in touch with fellow members of the 303rd Bomb Group and other airmen. Reunion newsletters and group histories gather photos, mission logs, and personal accounts. In those pages, his story sits alongside dozens of others. Crashed landings, close calls with fighters, bitterly cold missions that left men with frostbite from waist gunners' windows and nose positions. On December 20, 2003, in San Angelo, Texas, Alan Eugene Magee dies at age 84, after complications from a stroke and kidney failure. His obituary notes the essential facts. Born in Plainfield, New Jersey, youngest of 6 children, Army Air Force's ball turret gunner, fall survivor, POW, airline worker, husband, and citizen. He is buried in Texas soil, far from Saint-Nazaire but forever linked to it by history. What remains of his story? First, a technical lesson, even if indirect. Magee's fall and survival, along with similar cases like British tail gunner Nicholas Alcamade and Soviet airman Ivan Chizov, remind designers and tacticians that the human body can endure more than early models predicted, but only under very specific conditions. These stories encourage deeper analysis of impact biomechanics, crash survivability, and the design of aircraft escape systems, even if they are not sole drivers of change. Second, a doctrinal memory. In the narrative of the air war, early deep raids like Saint-Nazaire illustrate the cost of inadequate escort, limited intelligence on flak density, and overconfidence in armor. Magee's experience is one human thread in that larger tapestry, a case study in what happens when a crewman ends up in the worst possible position at the worst possible moment. Third, a human story. His survival depends on the structure of a glass and steel station roof, the presence of trained German surgeons who respect the laws of war, the endurance of a wounded POW over years of captivity, the willingness of former enemies and occupied civilians to later erect monuments honoring both attackers and defenders. Decades after the war, visitors to Saint-Nazaire can see the memorials and read the names. They may not know the full technical specifications of AB-17F, 27BO, or the exact pattern of flak bursts on January 3, 1943, but they will understand something simpler. A young man fell from the sky without a parachute, lived, and later returned in peace to honor the dead on both sides. For modern aircrew and historians, Magee's story is not a tale of invincibility. It is a reminder of vulnerability, of how exposed ball turret gunners were, of how fragile bomber crews could be under heavy fire, and of how survival sometimes comes down to factors no manual can capture. In the end, the pilots' manuals, training films, and doctrine updates will barely mention names. They will talk about altitudes, egress times, survival equipment, and enemy fire patterns. Somewhere between the lines, however, sits a man who once looked at a shredded parachute at 20,000 feet, blacked out, and woke up under a German hospital lamp. The title history remembers him by could be written exactly as this script bears it. The pilot who survived a bailout without a parachute.